So you got some tea there, or coffee, or beer, wine? What you got?
I have water and I have chocolate mousse made from avocados and honey
Ooh, and cocoa.
and cacao. Yeah,
Or
yeah, yeah.
okay. Ooh, that sounds
Have you had that
wonderful.
before?
No, no, no.
It
Would,
makes,
would you
I reckon,
recommend?
a pretty damn good mousse. Just literally just avos mashed.
Okay, welcome to the Deadbeat Philosophy Podcast. I'm Dave Baumeister. I'm here today with my good friend on the opposite side of the planet as it continues to spin, Andrew George. Andrew, how are you doing today, man?
Pretty good. Cannot complain.
Very good. Yeah. What's like? Describe your setting, because like if for those of us watching in the video, we have like a bit of horizon behind. So just to picture where you are. Are you in inside of a cave, or you out in the open?
Um, Somewhere in between the two of those, it is a
Mm-hmm.
outdoor camp kitchen kind of setup. So like a permanent shelter. Well, permanent's probably the wrong word. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Out in the outskirts of this little city in Australia called Lismore, uh, the peri-urban fringe, which means it's like sort of old farmland. In fact, there used to be houses here that no longer exist have since been removed because it was too flood prone. Um,
Uh-huh.
but in this sort of context of neo peasant that I somehow live a bit, we are re-living on such dangerous lands because
Mm-hmm.
it's free and it's currently just past sunset. For those who can see the sunset in the distance behind me, and I
Mm-hmm.
can hear frogs in the dam and crickets. It's pretty vocal actually around me.
Yeah. No, we can hear them a bit too. And I remember last time we chatted in the spring, there were cicadas, if I'm not mistaken, or was it, yeah. Um,
Yeah, it might have been the same
or it
ones.
might have
It
been,
could have been cicadas.
okay. Yeah. But yeah, cicada, it's like but you got some locust like grasshopper guys doing their thing, and the croaking of the frogs. So like the landscape you're on, and I like that. Like let's start with that, like permanence, impermanence. Like you guys live on this flood prone land, but you're living there in a more, I don't know, like with a lighter footprint, right? Than I assumed in the houses that were there before. Um, and one like big question that I like thinking about from like a perspective of environmental philosophy and the human nature relationship is how we humans live on the earth, and the sort of sense of permanence or impermanence that we seek. And I think that one of the big problems in the history of human civilization, as regards the non-human, or kind of the rest of nature, is that humans try to put in place permanent, stable, concrete, literally concrete, or otherwise, like structures where they feel like they have control over their lives and the climate and the space. And many cities, that's kind of the principle of human existence that you just see since kind of the dawn of settlements. But it seemed maybe the climate crisis, one thing that it occasions us to do is to call that whole mode of living into question, like that kind of the need for, or the kind of desire for that sort of solidity and permanence. What do you think about that?
Oh man, perfect. Love that. It Yeah, so last time I spoke to you was when this cyclone was coming our way and the threat of flooding, and I was really exhausted because I was sort of preparing not only my own living situation, but many different friends who all lived on the floodplain. Sort of
Mm-hmm.
many of some of them squatting houses that had been bought by the government since the massive floods in 2022, that the government, intentionally bought so that people didn't live in them. But
Mm-hmm.
so then people squatted them, and lo and behold, that was a bit of a hassle. But not from a like safety point of view, which was the government's main reason for doing it. Um, ironically, yeah, but more from a material possession point of view. We had to move things up and inside the houses on the second floor or on the floor because it's already raised on stilts. We had to move possessions up. And it was just
Mhm.
exhausting. And I just really realized like having minimal material possessions is one way to be resilient to disasters, no matter what they are, really. Like, even if a fire burns your house down, but you are less concerned with material possessions, you're going to be less impacted. And I also
Mhm.
went to a flood impacted area in May and volunteered for a week or so doing some of the raw, like cleaning mud, flood mud out of these houses. And it made me really think, which I've written about and on my Revolution or Collapse blog, like this evolutionary factor, which is like the amount of stuff you have, how you live in a floodplain, for example, um,
Mhm.
is going to have impact your experience of floods or ability to be resilient to floods. So it's just like,
Mhm.
will people continue? Like, basically, I am living here with a tiny house and this camp kitchen setup. And already this is like a fair bit to deal with if a flood were to be coming this way. The key thing is to have a plan, which I want to still sort of haven't fully sorted out. But the plan is to basically move the wagon and get a trailer and move the stuff and not have stuff that's going to create an environmental burden, pollute the area.
Mhm.
Um, but just on that note of urbanization and this way to like conquer nature, basically, having lived in this sort
Mhm.
of living here in this flood prone area where it's a real thing that I have to think about and be reminded of. And that takes some level of like, yeah, consciousness shift, really. But then going into a city, it's incredible. I remember going into Melbourne and visiting my friends and realizing that they didn't have to worry about how heavy their furniture was because there was zero chance it was going to flood where they were. Of course, that
Mhm.
doesn't just relate to a city, but it was a stark reminder of like what's out there. But
Yes.
a key, this other thing. Also, recently on my trip to Melbourne, I met somebody who lives out in the bush and definitely fire prone. And they've lived in fire prone environments for a few years. And they actually thought it was incredible to live in a fire prone area because you're reminded that nature is there, that nature can be a powerful, terrible, massive force. And in some
Mhm.
ways, living in urban areas, we can forget that.
Yes. Yeah, it's like there's it's one that's maybe out of sight, out of mind, or it's also there's a sort of maybe denial of it in these urban spaces. And I like what you said there. I mean, about also literal weight of your possessions and of your furniture. I'm in my apartment here in Stuttgart, um, which is by American standards a pretty compact apartment, and I think by American standards, being an American, I'll keep calling it by that. I think we have maybe less stuff, material possessions than like a family of our size and the average in the US would. But nonetheless, we have tons of stuff. We have a lot of weight. Um, just and this sort of sense when you live in an urban area and everybody lives that way, this sense of your kind of you have private space and you can store things there and expect that they'll continue to be there. And this sense of these cities, it's almost this projected permanence. Like, that none of these buildings will last forever. Or if they, the sense in which they will survive into the far future is very uncertain, but everything crumbles. Nothing can last forever. But there's this sense that almost that you're there and it's just in this kind of indefinite secure stasis. But if you are kind of born and raised and live in that mentality, like in let's say just like the mentality of a city or even of a town. I mean, the city in the sense of like a kind of a ostensibly permanent. It takes itself to be permanent, whereby in fact it's not. So there's like a trick involved in the just formation of a settlement, in how human like ideology and ideas start to think, and then people kind of take that permanence for granted. And there's something about that, how it shapes human beings in their relationship to nature. I think that, yeah, we should maybe be critical of, and for insofar as, let's say, like most of the human population is born and raised that way, then it requires us to be mindful of it and to try to kind of work against it. It's almost as if just kind of the mainstream influence and direction and weight, literal weight of settled civilization, makes humans kind of, it sets us up to be against nature and to be in denial and blind to the reality of non-human nature, its power, it's turbulence, it's it's just its reality. I don't know. That's maybe a longer-winded way of saying it, but I'll also just point out that for us, in 2025, and maybe like to pinpoint what is it exactly about us that would make us mindful of that, and what sort of crisis? Why do we need to change course? Why is this a problem to that civilization is this way, or settlements? I think we can point to a lot of things. I'd like to talk about that, but I'll just point to even at least in the 18th century. Right now, I'm teaching a course about Jean-Jacques Rousseau and his sort of environmental politics, and his critique of city life and of civilization and of society is very similar. That he just thinks that the way that humans have tended to live in this sort of very recent slice of human history and of planetary history is harmful to us and harmful to the rest of nature. So the critique has been there for a long time, but I think now that kind of broad philosophical critique comes and interlaces with this reality of where we are as a planet and the kind of boiling point of the crisis that we have it. But what do you think about that? Like, do you feel that there's like some urgency at the moment for this to be thought about and worked on and experimented with? I don't know.
Definitely. And there's two things that immediately are on my mind. One is like the Philippines, which has just been hit by a really big typhoon, and no doubt the typhoons would be getting either more frequent or more intense because of the global heating impacts of moisture storage in the atmosphere and all these kind of things. But nevertheless, they have been impacting that part of the world for a long time. And from speaking with someone from the Philippines recently, it was like people are very resilient and to the typhoons there. And I'm sure, like, no matter how resilient you are, getting smashed by these typhoons is really devastating and destructive, and full on. But clearly, there'd be ways of that people are living in such an environment that they're still thriving or doing, houses on stilts. No doubt, a house on stilts above a mangroves is not going to have a washing machine in it. Maybe, or I don't know. Like, there's places in the world that have lived closer to the environment, to the elements, that I'm pretty sure we could check out, not to glorify or romanticize parts of the reality, but like it's that thing where people are a lot happier, right, in a lot of places that aren't as materialistic and capitalistic and over affluenza or whatever they call it. So that's something that I was reminded of. And the other thing that I think is very interesting is, I'm not sure if you're aware, but like the insurability of properties around the world is becoming an issue because of climate extreme events. So like the floodplains are becoming uninsurable, bushfire prone areas becoming uninsurable, whole coastal areas are going to become uninsurable. But if there's like a map of Australian insurability, and like urban areas are pretty insurable that aren't subject to flooding. because they've literally
Mm-hmm.
taken all the elements away that could, like the forest basically that used to be there, that could have been, put them at risk. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's actually this interesting thing that the urban areas kind of have made us more safe from some elements of disasters, at least according to
Mm-hmm.
like what can be insured, which is a bit of a measure. However, they're not going to stop
Yeah.
the smoke when the whole area, like around Sydney, around Melbourne, there were months of smoke in the big fires 6 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes. Yeah. So then there's like you weave in health, you weave in like health insurance, I suppose, and like kind of all the externalities that
mm,
affect urban areas. But you're right. That's interesting with insurability. It's like, because if properties can be insured, and this same thing is very prominent in the U.S. with fires, or say like flood zones in Florida, for instance, that swaths of the coast are becoming uninsurable in the sense, or just the insurance companies, like they don't see it as a worthwhile bet. They can't, and the value of the properties itself with the devastation and stuff. So, but it's like that's like a metric internal to capitalism and like the sustaining of property value and wealth and such. And so it's interesting that then, yeah, cities and like real estate within cities then become the sort of prime factor of investment. So it's like cities in a sense, represent this concentration of insurability, of that kind of systematic, like that's where the system is strongest um, in some ways. So, but do you, I don't know. So so you mentioned the Philippines, and you mentioned houses on stilts, and you mentioned resilience and different kind of, let's say, like alternate ways of living and modeling resilience in relationship to the climate. I know you've been following the COP31 week, right, in Brazil, that's taking place as we record and such. So, like, do you have any? And I know in your recent post, you kind of highlight some highlights of your thinking about that. And then, in addition to a conference that you yourself recently attended in Tasmania. So I don't know. Could you point to us to a couple examples from either of these spaces, these kind of very recent kind of gatherings of you know policy, ideas, community around climate issues? I mean, those on very different scales, but have you seen where in these cases have you seen examples of this sort of resilience or of these alternate ideas?
mm. Well, I mean, I was just listening to a podcast today that spoke with the environment minister of Brazil, and she sounded really cool. Strong advocate for feminism, for indigenous, and she was saying something about that they were doing this like stock take on the um, moral accountability or something to do with the COP
Mm-hmm.
process, because like a lot of promises are being made, some promises are being made, some plans are there to technically sort of work towards solutions, to compensate poor countries and all these things. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but she was saying, yeah, the morality aspect is that people aren't doing what they're saying they're going to do. This is sort of a slight aside, but what she mentioned, which sort of just like stuck out, was like how yes, there's like finance, yes, there's mitigation and adaptation of the climate
Mm-hmm.
crisis, but there's I think she said something like transformation. There is transformation,
Mm-hmm.
and there totally is transformation necessary for the lives of kind of every single person on the planet. Um, Not only to be be prepared and be resilient, but also to decarbonize our lifestyles and all these things. And it's all sort of pointing towards getting away from materialist values, or that's been forced upon us through consumerist capitalism. Like we have to leave that behind, and that's going to be a huge cultural shift. And hopefully we're not doing it against the massive tide of like advertising and marketing continuously wanting us to buy more. Maybe we can have it, but like
Mhm.
imagine the scale of transformation. It pretty much is the end of capitalism if we weren't to be pushing the consumerist thing anymore. Um, but at
Mhm.
the same time, disasters dematerialize you. Like they will, whether you have to flee somewhere, you're not going to be able to take everything with you, or something else happens. So I think culture is going to
Mhm.
change no matter what, as more and more people are impacted. But I have sort of pondered this. It's like, is it better to like make steps towards dematerializing in advance of it being forced upon us? Like getting used to cold
Mhm.
showers, for example, is one small thing, because probably the amount of hot showers we currently have is a waste of energy that can't be
Mhm.
sustained. It's like,
Mhm.
as an example.
Yeah. Yeah, and an example where like cold showers do the trick and are, like, I mean, I guess, maybe in like the cold of winter, like having heating in a structure, there's like a point at which there are things that cannot be done without and what that looks like. But then there's spaces in our lives. And that's a good example also that it's like the creature comforts of modern life. That kind of connects also with the ideology of living in this way. That's also connected to materialism and having material goods that have weight, but it's also about a certain lifestyle and expectations about like what each of us is entitled to and what it means to live as a modern human being. In these affluent like in industrial societies, then there's this sense that kind of like the way that everybody ought to live, the sort of normative mode of living is one that involves having so many possessions, having such a lifestyle, and taking hot showers. But so for that to transform, like I also like this idea of transformation um, that it's not just about, say, investing in new technologies or adapting here and there in a kind of a technical way. Like, here's this technical problem that the climate crisis has thrust upon us. Let's solve it with our technical solutions without changing the background mentality or without a broader transformation taking place. But transformation that has a moral dimension, that has a social dimension, um, in this broader sort of sense and swath, and that has intergenerational aspects, and I like that a lot. What do you think? Like, are you with regards to that transformation? Like, do you feel that that transformation is underway or already in a sense? Does it? What's the kind of logic of that transformation? Like, is it something that might not happen or that will inevitably happen? I mean, you're also kind of pointing to this question, is it better? And I don't know what better would mean, better in the sense of, say, like the overall health of the planetary ecosystem, for humans to adapt gradually, but still hold on to their lifestyle little by little and kind of reduce and reform, or for there to be a radical break and a transformation in a very much more drastic way. But do you feel that this transformation is underway and has a certain necessity to it, or what's your kind of view and feeling about it?
Hmm. Poof. I mean, I don't know. Would be There's so much. I think one thing to say is, I'm just in Australia, and I've only been in this small country town part of Australia for a while. So
Mm-hmm.
and I recall from my time living in Europe that Australia was like 10 years behind. So who knows what's going on in other places regarding this? I think obviously and unfortunately, a big trend happening in the world is like the increase of the middle class. Not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, but like objectively, there would be a lot more people who have more money now, and that means going towards materialist society, like the consumption that we have seen historically in the US and Australia and stuff, like in China.
Mm-hmm.
Massive amounts of people are going in that direction. So that's a yeah, wouldn't even know where to begin, really. I think I think one thing that's positive is basically that, life under capitalism is not the best life in many, many, many ways. Like in
Mm-hmm.
Australia, for example, the suicide rates are really, really high. The depression, the anxiety, like all of these things which
Mm-hmm.
are societal ills caused by the alienation and extraction and insanity of capitalism, really. So
Mm-hmm.
the positives is that if we um, transform society, end capitalism, uh, then this creates a lot of space for the things that actually really nourish us, like community. I'd say like music, like culture, like on the ground level, like working together for something that's actually meaningful and tangible. Like I think Australia has a oversupply of marketing, comms professionals, but imagine
Mm-hmm.
all these people working together to actually grow food and fix things and manage things locally. In this collective structures and cooperative structures and all these kinds of things. Like I think the transformation was going to go hand in hand with larger scale changes, and if we nourish the sociability of society and enable really good social connections, then
Mm-hmm.
then it could really take off, I guess.
Yes. What's your view of the role of social media and all that as well? So, like in the sense of like community and social, that dimension, and against this background that you pointed out in Australia, that I think also applies in the U.S. and I think to a large extent in Europe, of this kind of like a lot of social ills that seem to be afflicting society at the moment in terms of insecurity, alienation, lack of community, loneliness, also economic insecurity and precarity, and sort of an increase in inequality, or like ever more so. And that goes kind of hand in hand with kind of a K-shaped economy in many of these places where like, I mean, just look and say at stock markets and public traded company valuations and such, where like the tech and especially AI, like industry kind of, more and more capital is accruing there.
The
And
bubble
many,
is
many people are just
expanding
kind of,
there. Yeah.
exactly. And the rest of the economy is being kind of, like fed upon and extracted and exploited and kind of squeezed. And it's getting harder and harder for more people in these affluent societies on a number of levels. So it seems there's like psychological ills, there's economic problems and structural issues there. But then I wonder, it's like, what's your view of social media in particular? And this is, I mean, right now we're talking over this, cross-planetary digital technologies. This will be a podcast, our conversation here that will go out, and that, clips of it will be on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram. And the idea of, ostensibly kind of building some community that way. But then it seems that type of community building can't replace or substitute for what you're pointing out there, and kind of working together, getting things done. Or I don't know, maybe it can. What's your view about that? Like, as somebody who, you live with human animals in the flesh and around them, and you work with, in meat space with humans, but are also kind of straddling the digital space with your blog and with projects like this and such. So how do you think about that?
Mm. I guess I don't think about it too often. I have probably recently returned to like posting a couple of things or more things on social media, and even like I have really not really used Instagram much at all, and now I'm just like actually following links that I get sent and looking at what's happening. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, I'm a pretty averse to like doom scrolling, I guess, and I think thankfully have kind of uh, inoculated myself against that for the most part, which is
Mm-hmm.
cool. So I can kind of use social media in a moderate way. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, in terms of community, it's an interesting one because the alternative to a well, we have like friends that when you're a kid and you live in one place, your friends are all kind of in one place, and
Mm-hmm.
that's this actual nostalgic ideal I realize for myself is like back when all my friends were in the same area. And
Mm-hmm.
as you get older, you've lived in different places, maybe friends are all over the place, and you can keep in touch with them on the social media space. That's a community. And then you have the community of ideas and people who are interested in similar ideas. And I guess there is
Mm-hmm.
power in that community too, because, but I think it shouldn't be engaged with in the absence of engaging with your direct geographical community in many, many ways. And I recently in Melbourne did a little session talking about Lismore and the flood and preparing for collapse and opened up this discussion: how might we prepare our communities for disruptions? And it was great to be
Mm-hmm.
in a breakout group with people who had very, had a really, it was just so cool to hear different people's ideas. But people who like, live in an urban area, are in rentals, are forced to move every year or something because of the rental market.
Mm-hmm.
And they're, in the urban area in particular, there's not necessarily the same stability in your neighborhood as there might be in some other environments, like in the countryside, although it's probably all changes. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it kind of like, so it seems, I guess, more challenging. Why would I connect with my street when I might not be here soon or something like that? Meanwhile, I
Mm-hmm.
can keep connecting online. But I think, yeah, I think both of those communities are really, really, really important because it's like, yeah, the online world does enable us to see great things happening in other places and to communicate ideas and ways of doing things and stuff like that. That can then
Mm-hmm.
potentially be taken up and inspire others. Um, but yeah, at the same time, if you don't, I think it's just super valuable to have a bit of relationship at least with our neighbors, because the downside of an online community is the bubbles, is the algorithmically defined boundaries
Mm-hmm.
to who hears what you want to say or whatever. And in the real world, there's people with different views, and it's quite exciting and interesting to realize that we have to keep getting along with people we have different views with, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe we don't, but to make that decision consciously. And I think we do. I think we need to be around diverse ideas, otherwise we ourselves maybe become detached from reality and very judgmental and all these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And the algorithmically driven social media technologies, yeah, kind of lead to bubbleification, whereby like idea diversity isn't as present, or it isn't present in as healthy of a way as it could be through, let's say, in-person interaction with diverse communities. Um, and I suppose, yeah, I like that response of kind of both and. Like, it seems that we can't be too extreme in the moment. Like, let like going, assuming that, as is the case, I think for you and I, and we can like step back from this conversation and say it's like if we both take the kind of the existential moment of the climate crisis, let's call it that, or the global environmental crisis seriously, and think that something action does need to happen and that we in our own ways want to contribute in our lifetimes to addressing this, then it becomes a case, so we can't be Luddites. I mean, the Luddite option of saying no technology, that whatever change has to be done in a more like a purely primitive organic type of way. I mean, I know there are people in the environmental movement who that's kind of their option, that to say almost to reject the entirety of this technologies and the kind of pull of big tech and social media, um, and in a certain sense to try to approach things in a sort of more grainy purity that's disconnected from that. But I think that maybe we don't have the luxury to be able to do that. And what you point out, this ability to create community and to create belonging and sense of purpose and connection with people, those advantages seem to be very real. So, but at the same time, you don't want to drift so far into one that you're doing only one or the other. But just to point out that it also, it's like philosophically, there's something about there's a moral question here. It's like, can you achieve moral ends through means that aren't themselves purely moral? That would hold here, I think, insofar as, and maybe this is just my idiosyncratic view of things, is that I do think at the same time, social media technologies, the kind of digitalization of our lives, so now with AI, which uses an enormous amount of energy, like the energy requirements of AI, but the sort of AIification of everyday life and of chatbots and of our social relationships that's happening kind of from childhood on now, that all of that adds and amplifies and leads humans more and more into the city that we described before. It's like kind of humans become more and more entangled in, especially insofar as all that technology is just complicit with capitalism and profit and value and such. So it's almost like the more that that's used and that human existence is lived in that space, it's kind of entrenched and entangled with something that's part of the problem. But could that also be used to create structural change? Like, could there be a revolution or an anti-capitalist movement that itself uses the tools of capitalism to dismantle capitalism? But at the least, it seems that there's some kind of double-edged sword worry stuff going on there, and that no single method or vehicle here is going to be pure or a silver bullet, and there has to be a kind of a combination.
Well, like on that note of the tools of capitalism to dismantle capitalism, I guess that's a really important kind of question. Just because from like organizing work that I've done and civil resistance, you sort of go through this expected route where you have to have social media. You have to have. We were sort of probably a bit behind in like sticking with Facebook, showing my generation. But then you need Instagram. Then there was Twitter. You need Twitter. Then TikTok comes along. Well, you need TikTok. Like there's different audiences on these different platforms. And it's this, unfortunately, it's just relentless, to, particularly if you're like a grassroots resistance organization and then you are expected to be able to communicate with people on all these platforms. It creates like so much work, which first of all is really shit. But it's a bit part of, like how are you going to communicate to people? But the main thing is that all of your communication is going to be mediated by ginormous tech companies. Like that's who they are. That's who you're trying to communicate through. But if not them, then it's the mainstream, what do they call it? Legacy media, newspapers and TVs, which has got a very small audience as well. So it does raise, I think there's a really important question about trusted communication sources, having your own means to send your own message. And a podcast is a great example of that. And then, what you really raised points me towards like AI, and it's like, I've pretty much don't use AI very much yet. Part of me is like, can it save time? Can it, that enables more work to be done? Am I a fool for not using it now? But so far I haven't come to a solution on that one. And so that means not using it very much at all.
Yes. Yeah. And it seems to be one of these, or it's kind of like a technology that could go any number of directions. And that, like, again, in the context of, say, the let's say like the broader environmental movement, does AI have potential to contribute to the solution, or does it amplify the problem? Um, and maybe, I think there's kind of a lot of advocates of AI, and also in kind of green economy spaces that would point to, well, we can use AI to analyze our utility grids, and through that become far more efficient with how our energy is used, or all sort of administrative processes that could be streamlined. Um, AI can lead to less bureaucracy, or to, yeah, just kind of on the drumbeat of efficiency and such, that there's a lot, we stand to kind of benefit from that as a planet. But at the same time, where it leads, I mean, there's like this big existential question of the singularity, and that will AI, if it achieves artificial general intelligence, is there a sort of a real threat to human existence then? Like, the so-called like robots taking over and that type of thing, what that could lead. I mean, if AI is already at play in nuclear arsenals and such around the world, like, could nuclear apocalypse flow from that? I don't know. But it's at least, it kind of raises the stakes of us. What I see is, again, this kind of longer, centuries long, modern environmental skepticism towards technology, or at least worry about what technology does to our relationship to the non-human natural world. So, but do you worry about the coming like robot apocalypse, and how does
Um,
how does that intersect with your other kind of futural worries, or sense of like what might be over the horizon?
mm, yeah, yeah. It's a little bit like when COVID happened, and I didn't really pay too much attention to COVID. Like, I just sort of got on with things. I didn't get really upset
Mm-hmm.
about the vaccines, or um, like conspiracies, or look into it much at all. I basically was like, okay, whatever, I'll let other people focus on this. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a little bit like that with AI. And um, but yeah, my dad's quite into it, and so sends me some videos which keep me a little bit um, aware of where it's up to. And it's pretty incredibly disturbing. Like, you've probably seen how like AI is doing research on itself, and like publishing journal articles about how to improve AI written by AI. So it is like um, learning how to learn and how to improve itself already. Um, yeah, but it's fascinating because at the same time, it is this massive capitalist tech AI bubble thing, which is totally
Mm-hmm.
happening, and all of it really is based on a relatively precarious global supply chain of NVIDIA chips and the rare earth metals, minerals, and stuff that Donald Trump just
Mm-hmm.
made a deal with Australia about. Like, there is there's precarity in it for sure. At the same time, yeah, part of me can imagine that here I am focusing on community resilience and revolution against capitalism and the climate crisis, and then out of nowhere, suddenly everyone's just shot by drones from the AI. Like, that could easily happen. That'd be pretty hectic. But I guess if that happens, I'm just going to have to accept it and be like, I didn't know, whatever. Like, that's the tragedy of life. There's lots of absurd bullshit that people have been subjugated to forever. But it
Mm-hmm.
is very disturbing, um, I guess, how AI and technology, one of the most disturbing aspects is really how it um, could lead to autonomous kill chains, I think they call it, like through all the massive amounts of surveillance, data surveillance, cameras, AI programs that, facial recognition, that combined with like uh, some kind of algorithm that determines who should be hit, who should be killed, and like a company
Hmm.
Palantir does this kind of thing currently, and apparently, have been testing it out in Gaza for a while, but could be sort of deployed across the planet to create, combined with the insane drones that are available now. To yeah, it could happen. I think we probably are at the level of Terminator 3.
Yes.
And it sort of reminds me, saying this, this book that I'm reading is talking about, the climate crisis actually creates a deadline for a global revolution to end capitalism. It's like we need to do it in 5 years.
Hmm.
And I think chucking AI into the midst, as like, probably we don't need to be there's probably pros and cons to AI, and like there could be some, you know, who knows if it's that plausible that it would kill us. But either way, it's something that people are not consenting to, that like tech oligarchs are capitalizing from, that is increasing the environmental destruction associated with it, that is probably
Hmm.
increasing the chances of global nuclear Armageddon, etc. So it basically is a massive existential threat alongside climate, both of which have their root cause in capitalist profit at this point. If unless those
Hmm.
AI companies become cooperatives owned by the people who work there and democratically run, then until that point, yeah, it's dodgy.
Yes. Yeah. Um, yeah, it doesn't seem very likely, even though I think there's some like the ideology, say with open AI in particular, the idea of it kind of being nonprofit and community led, at least at first, and that changed in that organization. But um, something of kind of like when it puts its best foot forward, it's kind of pro human and community interface and kind of responsible and responsive to the people and ultimately and to the planet. But in matter of fact, whether it's been co-opted or it was always kind of that, but just masquerading as something else. It's yeah, it isn't that. Say more about that deadline. Like what's that book and what's the sense? Why would there or what is the sense in the 5 year deadline for revolution? All in.
All in a revolutionary theory to stop climate collapse, written by I find it hard to read at this light. Mariana Rodriguez and Sinan Eden. I think a Portuguese woman and a Turkish person. Um, well, basically, it's this simple-ish premise, which is that if we are meant to get to zero emissions by 2050, one way to look at that is in 2049, only a couple of countries still have emissions, and they will hopefully, presumably, be the poorest countries, the
Mm-hmm.
most developing countries. By 2048, similarly, it's like a couple more countries have still got emissions, but they're all getting towards zero. So by 2040, you have most of the countries in the world have gotten there. Maybe like Brazil, India, and that are getting to zero emissions at 2040. But to be like fair and all the rest, countries that have globally produced the most emissions have benefited the most from industrialization, like Australia, US, UK, Europe. We should be getting to zero emissions by 2030. Um, if we're going to get to this goal of zero by 2050. And
Mm-hmm.
on that regard, there's currently the sort of financialization, or the basically the asset value of all the coal and oil and gas in the ground um, is more. It's these fossil fuel companies have like more value to them than we can safely dig up. Like we cannot dig up amount of fossil fuels. It's actually, like I learned it at this conference. It's 60% of all currently open or mines must be left in the ground, let alone no expanding of new mines. But doing that will basically destroy capitalism, because it's that massive wiping away of value that these companies would all be based on. So it's basically saying,
Mm-hmm.
if we actually are serious about the climate crisis, global north countries have to get to zero emissions by 2030, and in doing that, it will end capitalism. So we actually, and capitalism as the root cause of the growth paradigm and all this kind of thing uh, needs to
Hmm.
end either way. So it's basically one thing I just kind of like it. It's like we've got a deadline. And the funny, cool thing I reckon is that, like, yeah, people actually work well with deadlines. And this book, maybe not everyone, but me, I work well with deadlines, and it makes sense to me. Um, and
Hmm.
it goes into it in like sort of other details, but I'm finding it very invigorating to be reading this. You know, it's really pointing out some good ideas.
Yes. Yeah. And do you like, so with that deadline, then having, and that makes good sense that, like, given that 2050 net zero idea or ideal, like if that is removed or augmented, then the nature of the deadline changes. But assuming that, like, are you optimistic, pessimistic, somewhere else with regards to where that deadline is going? And I know, I mean, your blog is titled Revolution or Collapse, right? And even in describing the premise of the book there, that there's um, like there's, it's kind of one way or the other, maybe. Something's gonna change. But where do you feel about that? You're a pretty optimistic person, at least in the years that I've known you, you know. But does your optimism spread over into this domain?
I think rather than optimism, well, I do realize that I'm not particularly pessimistic. Like there is some kind of optimism there, which probably to a large degree comes from my sense of like agency and stuff like that. Like, you know, I know I can have some role, some influence on the world when I'm part of working in teams, good teams. Um, yeah, but you know, it seems ridiculous to imagine a huge revolution in the next 5 years. However, referring to, for example, my friend Roger Hallam, and there was a recent revolution convention online, and he reminds me, which is what I will definitely know, which is that uh, there is a revolution. Revolutions are absolutely coming. Just for the sheer fact of, say, sea level rise, which is going to be meters. Apparently, a new paper has come out saying it's going to be, I don't know, 5 meters or something by the end of the century. So that means basically every major city on the planet will be displaced, like hundreds and hundreds of millions of people. It's like that cannot happen without a revolution. No way. That cannot happen without massive amount of social pressure and just and like it'll be revolutions. And the question is it going to be a fascist revolution or is it going to be a pro-social revolution? And I love this sort of inevitability of it. I kind of see that the material conditions are going to push us towards those moments. Whether that happens in 5 years, um, also, I think, yeah, I think the key thing, I think this idea that is both this book and like Roger Hallam and that kind of uh, go into is, you know, like left defeatism, like thinking that it's not possible, sort of not trusting the um, well, either the inevitability or yeah, just our agency in doing what's necessary to create the revolution and to do it. Like it's literally what's happened throughout history for the last centuries. People have organized revolutions or mass uprisings have happened and they've been co-opted by a certain more organized group. So that's like a really common thing. It happened 14 years ago in Egypt, mass uprising, but the organizers were pretty decentralized and it got co-opted basically by the Muslim Brotherhood, who were a more organized, politically established thing. So that's the
Mhm.
tragedy of uprisings without organizations. But yeah, I think but back to revolution or collapse. Um, yeah, there's this other element which is as the global system collapses, as pretty much every empire collapses, and we now have a global industrialized consumer empire, which will collapse. AI as a curveball or something like that, maybe. But either way, probably the majority of the society system would collapse if some people do shoot off into some AI universe. I don't know. But anyway, it's
Mhm.
interesting to sort of see collapse, to sort of have a dual strategy that is moving towards both outcomes, or maybe both outcomes are the same in some ways. It's sort of like, yeah, and what I'm interested in and what I think is the way to go towards this is, tackling inequality currently, tackling the billionaire class, empowering the working class of the world, uniting the working class and the oppressed people, which is massive, as we talked about earlier. The inequality crisis growing and stuff like this. So, and building community while we do it, which will make us more resilient to big disruptions.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah. And yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So like a dual strategy, a kind of recognizing that there's this fork, that there's, and thinking with, and Roger Hallam being the British activist and thinker and one of the founders of Extinction Rebellion, right? And I subscribe to their blog too, and the sense of kind of bottom up grassroots community building to provide, as you say, kind of like structures for like transformation, and kind of a pro social, you could say like democratic, like ways of dealing with this, and the energy behind that sort of idea and movement. But it being something that's ticking away already, I guess that's kind of maybe the broader philosophical point, the sense that it's not, I mean, someone from the outside, let's say, who isn't tuned in at all to, or very little to, like kind of the state of the global environmental crisis, and where we are, and the details, and the kind of, the papers and the studies, and the UN white papers and documents and things, might just be like, okay, you guys are kind of talking about this big fantasy, or they're, like, it's so speculative, what is going to happen, what's not. I mean, let alone people who kind of dismiss that, climate change as a hoax, as Trump does, and as many kind of fascist or proto-fascist authoritarian states do, Hungary, Russia, certainly Saudi Arabia, those who have very vested interests in fossil fuels, and in that whole industry. But so from a certain perspective, it might seem that we're just kind of like spinning ideas in the mist. But that isn't the case if you always keep in mind the sense that regardless of what we do, this is happening. In a sense, it's kind of like the time is moving on, and with sea level rise, and there's many other kind of things that you can point to in the history of the planet as we're living it now, like the fuse is lit and the cat's out of the bag, and that this is a process that's unfolding in nature, in a sense, like what you already talked about, kind of beyond the city earlier, like with wildfires, with floods, with just the planet is in movement, and this is what's happening. So then it's up to us then to discuss our ideas and organize and to work with each other, in that space. But there's something almost comforting, or at least philosophically, it's grounding, it's anchoring this idea to kind of know where we stand with regards to the planetary history, and that's not uncertain anymore. I mean, it's kind of indubitable, and the trajectories of it. So, but it's like, can you agitate towards, let's say, kind of like peaceful pro-human revolution while still preparing for what could be very disruptive, violent, devastating collapse, and maybe you can do both. So, but that's it's like that's something to straddle. That's like a theoretical, philosophical, activist, political space to inhabit with this duality, that I think is pretty specific to this moment, and is quite interesting.
Uh,
So.
yeah, just on that note, like from this region where I am now, the Northern Rivers of New South Wales, I may have mentioned it last time we chatted, but all these little hamlets and towns and valleys and areas that got severely impacted by flooding and landslides and extreme rain, they
Mm-hmm.
basically everywhere emerged spontaneous community centers, or existing community centers came to life to support people in that community. And from there, a lot of these groups gradually formed an alliance, the Northern Rivers Community Resilience Alliance, and have become really sort of organized and prepared for the next disaster that will come, in terms of like sort of legitimacy. Like they will be able to access government funding a lot easier, because that's one of the issues when a disaster hits, that the government doesn't trust just giving some money to a local group, um, even
Mm-hmm.
though it would be better if they did. So, but the fascinating thing is like meeting these people, being in the room with them, because of my work with the local Reclaim Our Recovery group. I've sort of seen these are cool people. Like they're not. There might be some overlap with climate activism. They're definitely all. The majority would be sort of climate aware, but they're also just community people, just regular people who are there to come together for their community. And I kind of, yeah, I think that they might yet be part of the revolution. The community
Mm-hmm.
resilience hubs that emerge as disasters continue to take place. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but they're kind of sort of straddling both worlds, and I guess there's this idea of mutual aid and solidarity, and I think that's what a lot of the activists in the urban areas do. They do mutual aid and solidarity, and people did mutual aid and solidarity organically when COVID hit. You know, a lot happened then. People
Mm-hmm.
started connecting on their streets and doing all kinds of things. So I guess organizing the revolution is sort of maybe trying to activate the same phenomena, but we've got to bring people along, make it seem really worthwhile and important, which it is.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that though. But there's something kind of like natural and emergent to that. That and I'll like mention Rousseau again, just his view of that kind of humans being naturally good and cooperative, and that there's something about kind of modern society that goes against our own natures to actually cooperate with one another for in the interest of a common good that doesn't involve enriching some of us at the expense of others, but our own, yeah, common good as a community of human animals, and with all the non-humans who are mixed up in this too. So um, there is a lot more to be said, and that's a good thing about us talking now for a second time, and we'll have to do it again, kind of at these milestones of the year and stuff too, and pick it back up. But then why don't you want to lay on us your recommendations? If you got 3 recommendations for listeners, viewers, book, album, film, mix and match, your choice, related to our topic or otherwise, lay them on us.
Okay. Well, first of all, this is the book that has given me an incredible amount of genuine optimism and trust and faith in humanity. Rutger Bregman, Humankind, A Hopeful History. And as you mentioned, Rousseau, yeah, it's a lot sort of looking at that. That's a bit of the structure of the book, is like the Rousseau versus Hobbes. What are humans good or bad or whatever? Is civilization good or bad?
Okay.
But what's really, really cool about this book is that it really sort of unpacks a lot of, first of all, very famous psychology experiments from last century that I'm sure listeners have heard of. For example, the one where the guy in the lab coat instructs people to electrocute someone in the next room,
Mm-hmm.
which was an experiment to sort of try and understand how the Nazi Holocaust happened. Anyway, I won't spoil it, but this book looks at the actual data from those experiments and people who've also explored the raw data, and it really shows that like a lot of these famous experiments were just by egotistical psychologists who wanted to be famous. But one of the coolest
Mm-hmm.
things in this book, another that I've learned, is that at war, the vast majority of soldiers never shoot their guns. Like people don't want to kill each other, and there's data to back it up on so many levels. So this book, I kind of want to read it again straight away and actually take some really good notes. But it's in me that I have faith in humanity even more again. And then on top of that, we'll chuck in this movie, which is just the first sort of movie I've seen for a while that was recommended from a few different directions. That was quite different to what I'd normally watch, which is K-pop Demon Hunters.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure nobody's heard of that. Yeah.
Okay, well, it's on Netflix, I think,
Yeah.
and it's like an animation, 3 K-pop singers killing demons and saving the world. It's got some good tracks in there. And
wonderful. Why would you recommend it in particular? Like, I haven't seen it yet, but I know my kid watched it when he was at a sleepover, and he raves about it, and he asked to play some of the songs. He asked our smart speaker and stuff. So I'm like, should I watch this too? Or is it worth the hype, or is it up to the hype?
Yeah, it was just entertaining. I just sort of enjoyed going into another world, and that it was, all female-led film for kids, like from a feminist point of view. That was good. And it's pretty funny. It was quite funny. It's quite sort of straightforward, but also cool. And the music is kind of banging. Like, I've never really listened to that kind of modern pop, K-pop music, but it was pretty cool. For me, it was like, 2025 culture, where you at? What's some people into? And very different to that is the music review after my weekend with Brazilian friends, getting exposed to an artist I'd already heard of, but this just blows my mind, called Renata Rosa. And she's got an album from 2003 called I sent it to you before. Oh yeah, Renata Rosa and this album Zunido da Mata. And I don't know, after having been hanging out with some beautiful Brazilian humans and dancing to this music on the weekend, I'm just like, yeah, I'll have more of that, please. And hope others like it too.
Yeah. No, I'm sure we will. I'll put that on right after we're done here, and I'll imagine you drifting off to sleep, or I'll imagine you on your beach camping experience with such music playing, and it's a very nice thought.
I'd like to hear
great recommendations.
What you think. I'd like to hear what you think of it, how it makes you feel.
I'll let you know. All right, man. Well, thanks very much. If for those watching on YouTube, you'll see it's quite dark behind Andrew now, but you've got to see the last glimmer of sunset, and it's been nice to be there with you as that transformation has taken place. So
the sun is getting closer to you now.
Yes, it's not quite fully in the sky, but it's going to cast its rays on me. And today we have a pretty sunny mid-November day, which here in Stuttgart, you can't always count on that. So I might do a little sunbathing as well.
Oh, good on you. No, thanks. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed where the conversation goes. It was really cool.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation with
Andrew George.
The Deadbeat Philosophy Podcast is a co-production of Deadbeat Media and the Museum Hegel-Haus Stuttgart. For more Deadbeat content and to chip in to keep the channel going, check us out at deadbeatphilosophy.substack.com. For more about the Museum Hegel-Haus, check out hegelhaus.de. That's HEGEL-HAUS.de. Adios and auf Wiedersehen.